During the election season, people who care about education mainly focused on the race between David Garcia and Diane Douglas, and for good reason. The person who sits in the superintendent of public instruction's chair is obviously extremely important to the future of public education in the state. But really, the superintendent's powers are pretty limited. It's the legislature and the governor who make the laws that the superintendent puts into practice. So we need to start thinking about what they're going to be doing about education over the next 4 years. I don't expect many surprises from the legislature. It's still dominated by the same conservative Republicans who've starved public education while they funneled money to private schools in the form of vouchers and helped charter schools any way they can. But Governor-elect Doug Ducey is a new kid on the block education-wise. During the campaign, he mainly talked about education in generalities, but he's shown his hand recently when he picked the 3 people who are advising him on education during the transition period before he assumes power. Who are the 3? Well, Annie and I will talk about each one in a minute, but here's the first thing you need to know about them. Not one of them comes from the school districts that educate well over 80% of Arizona's children. No school district teachers, no principals, no superintendents. Ducey has assembled a team of privatizers who represent the interests of private schools and charter schools. At the top of the list is Lisa Graham Keegan. When she was in the Arizona legislature, that was back in 1994, she was instrumental in creating Arizona's charter schools. Actually, what she did was she sponsored a private school voucher bill. And given the makeup of the legislature at that time, it had a very good chance of passing. That scared the teachers' unions and the Democratic legislatures, so they made a deal with her. They said, "We'll help you pass a charter school bill if you'll back off on the vouchers." The result was the unregulated charter school system we have today. The law made it far too easy to begin a charter school. Pretty much all you needed was an application and a pulse, and there was very little oversight of the schools once they were in operation. After the bill was passed, Keegan became superintendent of public instruction, so she was able to set the charter school legislation in motion. Arizona has earned its label as the Wild West of charter schools, and Keegan deserves the credit, or really the blame, for our wide-open, unregulated charter school system. So, Annie, what's Keegan up to these days?
Well, she's always up to a lot of things, Dave. Not many of them things that we think are good. But her involvement in Ducey's transition team or setting up his education team is not surprising at all. She is, I think, in lockstep with him in terms of wanting to privatize Arizona schools. And we've had dealings with her. We were back and forth for months in, at weekly meetings for about 6 months.
When you say we, you mean?
When we were working on Proposition 204 to try and get that on the ballot. And at that time, what she was trying to get on the ballot was a measure that would have provided a voucher system, in essence, for Arizona. It was dubbed backpack funding at that time, but it really was a voucher movement. And I don't think she's going to stop until she achieves that goal of hers. But the good news is that she's also not very good on follow-through. Lisa starts a lot of projects and she doesn't finish them. And she also has a past that catches up with her from time to time. When she left Arizona, she left here prematurely from her job as superintendent of public instruction. She went back east to head something that George Bush had set up, the Educational Leadership Council, and it was basically a pro-privatization group that was receiving federal dollars. But there were constant issues that came up there related to her mismanagement of the organization, conflicts of interest, audits as to procurement issues. And so she's not someone who comes to anything with a clean, uncheckered past. So, what she's going to bring to this effort, I think, is just her sort of ideological bent. Does she have any ideas beyond the voucher idea for Arizona?
Well, you've
No.
talked about the fact that she wants to restructure the way the funding is sent to the various schools and districts and things like that.
Well,
right?
she calls this backpack funding, and basically it's just saying that the funding follows the child And it basically busts up the entire way that we look at schools now. So there would be no school districts, in essence. There would be no, each individual school would just be its individual entity. And it makes no logical sense, no practical sense, but those issues have never stopped her in the past. So look for her, unfortunately, to be trying to peddle some of these, I think, rather reckless ideas in this administration. And Doug Ducey, unfortunately, has really no intelligent background in education issues. And so will he latch on to this? Is there going to be a counterbalance? Does he have anybody in his administration who's going to say, you know what, that is a harebrained, wacky idea, don't do it? I don't know.
Well, let's look at the next
Maybe
person.
the legislature will be the most moderating force.
That could be. So who's the next person in our threesome?
So the next person is Matthew Ladner, who we had numerous dealings with, you especially, when he was working full-time for the Goldwater Institute. So you maybe can talk more about your dealings with him.
Yeah, he was the education guy at the Goldwater Institute for a number of years, and he's very, very smart guy and very capable and loves the camera, loves publicity and things of that nature. And I found that he was the kind of a guy who would decide what he wanted to discover from his research and then go back and do the research that followed that, to the point where once, to say that there were 51% bureaucrats in the school districts, he called bus drivers bureaucrats and janitors bureaucrats and cafeteria workers, anything like that. So he's not a very trustworthy character. But as a member of the Goldwater Institute, he, like Lisa Graham Keegan, is a big privatizer. They very much believe in vouchers. He has sat he sits on a tuition tax credit STO, one of the student tuition organizations, and he sits, I believe, on the board of BASIS too, so he's very invested in charters as well. He's no longer with the Goldwater Institute. Now he is working with Jeb Bush. Speaking of Bushes, as you did earlier with Lisa Graham Keegan, he is a senior advisor of policy and research at Jeb Bush's Foundation for Excellence in Education. He's been working with Jeb Bush for years. Even when he was at the Goldwater Institute, he wrote in praise of Jeb Bush's Florida education program, which again was a matter of coming to the conclusions first and then going back to the data. So he is now involved at a national level on the privatization movement. And I should mention, most people who listen to the show know what ALEC is, a very right-wing organization where business interests and legislators, conservative legislators, get together. Well, Ladner is the co-author of ALEC's yearly report card on American education. So that tells you where Ladner is. And by the way, like Keegan, I don't believe either of them have been in the classroom. They're both kind of theoretical. His PhD is in history or something like that, not in education. So that's two of the three. And the third, those two people are fairly well known, but the third isn't so well known. His name is Eric Twist. And Eric Twist actually does have classroom experience, but so far as I know, it's totally in charters. He was an assistant principal at BASIS, which everyone knows is the high-end, very selective charter school that is always touted nationally for its accomplishments, which are based mainly on the type of students it has. And he moved from there, he moved over to the Great Hearts charter chain, which isn't well known in southern Arizona, because most of their schools or charters are in the Phoenix area, but it's very much like BASIS in that it's a high-end selective chain of charters. And he taught there and was a headmaster, and now he oversees the Great Hearts K through 5, kindergarten through 5 schools. So you have a bit more information about this lad.
Well, we ran into him again during the Prop 204 issues. He was one of the spokespeople for the opposition. And he did that in his role as the, at that time, headmaster of one of the Great Hearts Academies. He got in a little bit of hot water as well for a legal violation when he illegally sent out his opposition email to parents at Great Hearts telling them to vote against Prop 204 using school resources,
which is
against the law. And so he acknowledged that he had broken the law, said he regretted it. But what a lot of people may not know about him is that he is also the chairman of Arizona Right to Life. So he is in lockstep with Kathy Herod, Center for Arizona Policy, who is the architect of SB 1062, the anti-gay initiative or piece of legislation that was eventually taken back. But he is somebody who I think, again, is an ideologue. His father is someone who more people have heard of, and he is Steve Twist. He was one of the founders of the Goldwater Institute. He is a big-time Republican operative. He helped Mark Brnovich get elected. He has been behind a lot of efforts that have helped key members of the Republican legislature. So I'm not saying that his son is necessarily going to do his bidding, but at this point I have no reason to believe that he won't.
Well, there's one sidelight I've got to throw in about Eric Twist. When he was writing that email objecting to the 1-cent sales tax, which he did illegally, one thing he said is that he just doesn't want to throw money at education. That's what he objected to, throwing money at education. Now, Great Hearts Charters does everything but twist every parent's arm in the charters to have everyone donate $1,500 per child. So if you have 2 children in there, $3,000, because they say, and this is on their website, we can't possibly run our schools with the money the state gives us, and yet he doesn't want.
Well, what they don't want is they don't want their competitors to get any money. I mean, let's be clear about that. And he also, another piece of misinformation that he put out there was that Prop 204 was going to fund abortions, which of course was ridiculous. But the thing that I think all 3 of these people have in common is that they do bend the truth. And they have been responsible for spreading misinformation. And so I think, the most we can hope for in their new positions is that they will actually, just tell the truth.
Well, let's remember, and this is important, you commented that Doug Ducey has virtually no background in education. He knows what people tell him, and that's fine. A lot of governors are like that. But nobody is sitting there saying, here's what you've got to know about school districts. Here's what you've got to know about teachers in school districts. Here's what you've got to know about funding in public schools. He's not hearing that. And because he's not hearing that, he's getting 3 people who are telling him the same thing, pounding him with the same information. And so it's got to be right because that's what everyone's telling him.
Well,
right?
and I think the key here is he doesn't want to hear the other information. So I think he knows exactly what he wants to do. And
so that's where we are, folks.
the truth may not matter.
That's where we are.